Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and this episode we will discuss on big data and AI applications. We have our world famous speaker, Dr. William, Professor David Smith, Mr. Dan, Mr. Adam, Professor Rob, and Professor Donald. I want to start from Professor Rob. Uh, like most important thing is that we are analyzing big data and AI applications. How big data and AI work together. If you discuss briefly, because we will heavily promote it in the local industry.
Sure, and we're talking about cloud versus on-prem, and really the difference that you have between cloud and on-prem with regard to big data is more regulatory than anything else. You've got funding issues as well, CapEx versus OpEx, but the thing you have to look to is data location. The regulations that surround big data, particularly most of its customer data, vary from geography to geography, and the end result is you have to be very conversant with what you can do with the data, where it can be moved. The way to get around some of the regulations, at least analyze the data that is remote, is with a federated data model where you extract the information from the data, but you leave the data in place and you leave the details with regard to the individuals in place, so you don't violate the regulations. I mentioned that there is another advantage, that's OpEx versus CapEx. The cloud operations are operational expense, goes up and down depending on usage. Where if you're doing it on-prem, typically you have to buy the equipment, the CapEx expense just depreciated over time, and then try to align or assign that depreciation to the individual departments that are using the equipment, which has become problematic over time. And one of the things that's driving us to put all this data in the cloud is that ability to have a flexible cost model that can be easily attributed to the different departments that are using the data.
Thank you. Professor David Smith. Like we always hear that big data analytics, and how it will be helpful for the industries, especially small medium enterprise and this kind of organization.
Yeah, the growth of the big data and analytics is continuing to grow, but one of the biggest changes in the cloud that is, to me, very, very interesting is in the early days of the cloud, it was the desktops and the notebooks accessing most of the data in the cloud. Now, the primary means of access have really shifted a lot to both mobile devices and Internet of Things type of devices accessing that information. In fact, one of the analyst firms has said that almost 70% of the data going into the cloud are from those two sources today. So some dramatic sea shifts there. But one of the advantages of the cloud is it enables you to do common services better, so that you can have multiple users begin to use common services, like in the AWS cloud or the Microsoft or the IBM cloud, and take advantage of their machine learning, take advantage of their natural language processing, take advantage of their simple AI tools like their business intelligence builders that they all have, on up to much more complicated ones where you can do that and share it and aggregate it. The other big advantage of the new version of the cloud is many of the providers are changing the cloud model, which in some ways initially was really similar to the old mainframe model, where most of the cloud resolved in one or two or three data centers, where increasingly the cloud's becoming more edge of cloud, where they're pushing more processing, more storage, more data collecting out to the edge to reduce the latency time for the operations and things as well. And they're replicating their data much more effectively across cloud. Final thing on the cloud on this one, which I think is real important when you look at artificial intelligence, is the large cloud providers have come to the realization that the many countries are putting in place rules residing where the data must reside. And one of the huge shifts today is that you can now, in many of these large clouds, make sure that the data resides in your country and is under the governance of your country's laws, where in the past the data could be anywhere in the cloud. So those are some of the big changes and some of the things which I think are very exciting. But the movement to where devices and mobile devices are the majority of the access today, I think, is a really fundamental shift.
Thank you, Professor Donald.
Well, let me make sure. Yep, I'm on. Okay. Well, I definitely agree with David about the shift to handheld devices. And the reason is that you can do that is because of what Rob mentioned about the fact that there are um, computing platforms. I know basically it used to be that if I wanted to run software, I had to run it on my own computer. And in a sense, the way the cloud has gotten is the interface between the applications that are running in the cloud, like something like AWS, and you have gotten so fast that in a sense, the computer is with you. It's just not it's not physically with you. And it's changed the industry a lot because I worked for a company for years called NetApp. And what they do is make incredibly reliable data storage. So banks use it, and government, people who absolutely can't lose any data. They're extremely expensive. The cheapest one they have is $100,000, and that's pretty small. But they're so big that they allow so much data. They work in the multiple petabyte range, and you can't lose data the way that it's set up. And so the cloud just about killed them. So they managed to get big data companies like Amazon and things like that to buy their stuff. But for years, the model has been that every computer company has an IT department. They have their own machines. They have their own staff that takes care of those machines. And more and more companies have been saying, well, that's pretty darn expensive. Let's just have the IT all taken care of by Amazon or someone else like that. And so data centers have started number of them shrink and shrinks. However, as David pointed out, there are rules about where the data is stored, and there's privacy concerns. So if your bank account information is up on AWS, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about your data being on a place where anyone can access the systems that you're using? Well, it does make people uncomfortable with things like health records and financial records. So they developed models where part of your data is on AWS and part of it is in your system. So you wind up still having data centers, they're just smaller and more specific about what they keep. The whole thing about privacy is interesting because, again, you're using the cloud, but you're using computer systems that are the same as everybody's using it. And I just want to say that for people that don't know, what they do is what's called virtualization. And basically what it is they create a software that looks like it's a computer. It allows the applications to make any requests that they would normally make, but each one of those is independent from each other and has their own memory space and disk and so on like that. And they can't possibly talk to each other. So that's the way they work around that right now. So that's what I'll say.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. William.
Yes. I wanted to kind of approach this just slightly differently. First of all, I want to endorse all the comments that my colleagues have already touched upon. I think Donald's point of data security is of particular importance because it dovetails into what we've already covered, which is where the future is going. Whereas in the past, it's all been centralized in your own self-owned, or what Rob would say was your capital expenditure, a closed kind of system. But in order to really get to the point where we have artificial intelligence, I assume later on, in this program, you have to have the additional computing capacity. So what's been developing in the industry so far is what they're now referring to as a hybrid type of system. That is to say, as Donald pointed out, your own smaller IT department where you can have certain types of your data stored, but with the assist, and I'm just using that as an assist of cloud computing, because you need that kind of computing processing power. Because before we get to artificial intelligence, or as I've been saying for quite some time, augmented intelligence, which is where we're at right now, you really need four things. You need massive computing power, or processing power or capability, which is moving all of this stuff off to the information storage facilities off to the edge. You also need massive amounts of data, and where that data is stored, whether it's in the cloud or in a hybrid system in your own system as well, or a combination of both. And then you need the algorithms, and then you need people to write the algorithms. But most importantly, so understanding that those are the four basic pillars that you need before we can get into the discussion of AI, or what you'll need human interface in order to get to the what we consider AI being the brain of the situation. It seems to me that all of these considerations are really important. It's understanding where the industry is moving, as has been pointed out, how in this ever complex and ever changing and amassing of information, which is the big, or what I might say, really, really big data now, because I think we're beyond just basic big data, as Donald pointed out, we're into peta data at this point. Once we get through those items, that's where the industry is going, and that's where we need to look. But these are all things that we have to think about first. The capital expenditures, as Rob pointed out, where the information is actually being processed, as Dave pointed out, and security considerations of the type of data, whether it's health or your financials, or it could be just your corporate secrets, those kinds of matters. Dr. Sharif?
Thank you. Mr. Dan, you are a transhumanist. You are from Transhumanist Party. So what is the thought of transhumanist parties on this big data and AI, and what do you think? Is it the future, and how the human and AI will work together in future?
Yeah, it's a great topic. I'm a member of the Transhumanist Party. I think they've got the most big data AI evidence-based platform, which is why I love to run with their platform. I think, first of all, the term AI is often really abused and misplaced and overused. What we really have is machine learning, or ML, or deep learning. When you say AI, people think 2001, HAL, Space Odyssey, the computer that is so smart it acts like a human, and in this case, a very evil human. And indeed, people like Elon Musk, who has something called OpenAI, which recently, I guess, became not so OpenAI. He says that AI is, probably the biggest existential threat, which means threat to our existence as a species. So I think it would be useful if we, reframed the debate from AI to machine learning. I think what we actually have are, we have what are called, think of a bunch of spreadsheets running really fast, and they're all talking to each other. Is that thing intelligent, or is that just a tool we have to help us mimic intelligence? And I think that's really what we have, and what we're likely to have for the foreseeable future. So if you see people abusing the word AI, you might give them a gentle, probe to see if they're using the term correctly. Now, the other thing I think is AI smuggles with it the idea that there's going to be a technological fix to our problems with how we're treating the biosphere, and we can just sit back and live our lives the way we've always lived them. And I think the recent, reports on the state of the biosphere and the climate would tend to put this issue to rest, because we really need to treat the biosphere like a business that we're all CEOs of, and we're all trying to not have fail. So we could use big data and AI in this case. Statisticians talk about micromorts, which is a term for millionths of a death. When you have things that are causing deaths, sometimes they occur in very small fractions. So I would propose nanobiomorts. What are the things we're doing to the biosphere that are causing billionths of a biosphere death? And there's a movement also to give resources of nature legal standing or personhood. So I would say we need nano bio standing morts. And I think if we incorporated these two ideas into big data, we could actually make a reasonable case for using these technologies to bring our biosphere back into a regenerative status. Thanks, Sharif.
Yes, we have our AI expert, Mr. Tom Rose. Last week, we have a big debate in our platform, actually, like AI and human relations and how it works. And most important thing is that we are just thinking that is it possible in the politics, even in any elections, that human and AI they run together? And I don't know. Do you have any concept? You are a leader from the transhumanist, and you have your excellent work on AI.
Well, to me, if the question is bringing AI into what? Into politics? Into
yes,
into everything?
Yeah.
Not that it already isn't.
Yeah.
I'm going to be doing an exploratory campaign for 3 years for the USCP primary nomination. But it's more of a conversation about this type of thing. What I am doing is I'm putting up an artificial intelligence or a non-human intelligence as my running mate. And what this will do for 3 years is really test and measure and stress test the political system of whether we can register a non-human intelligence into the process. So that's going to be one of the things, one of the tests that this campaign approach will allow us to do, to see where the holes are exposed, any of the obstacles that a future sentient AI might have if it wants to seek office. It'll also help with the on-the-ground, real-time integration of collective intelligence for campaign decisions and other types of decisions. It's going to be if it can't be my official running mate after 3 years, it will still be historic in that it will be one of the first campaigns that will have an AI that is a major decision maker, a serious campaign manager, whatever I can make it will be. And so that's what this is. It's going to be a test, a stress test on the system to see what we can do for a future sentient AI if it wants to seek office. There are other innovations I'm bringing into this campaign. I'll fold them out more next week. It's kind of a soft launch right now as the team is coming together and I'm negotiating with certain AIs from my VP list. But one of the things too I want to do is have the cabinet confirmed prior to the primary election. So you're voting for a team. You're voting for a team of people rather than one guy with a bunch of ideas. I think it's important because no intention at all that it will win, that will be in the White House, any of that. That's not what this is about. This is about really having the conversation and stress testing the system for certain transhumanist ideals. Voting for a team, trying different things, new templates for the political process. And so that's what this will be about. I'll be more prepared to talk about it soon. But that's my goal, is to really try something practical and real world of getting a non-human entity in the process. So that's going to be exciting.
Excellent. We have our expert panelist, like our analyst, Professor Rob. Mr. Adam, I will give you time and plot. Before that, Professor Rob, this is an exciting idea. I think especially the youth community, they like it so much that the AI and human collaborating and they go for politics. What do you think? Is it possible? And what will be the future? What do you think?
Well, certainly it's possible. The issue is it acceptable to the electorate? We have to do an awful lot of groundwork, I think, before people actually trust an AI in that role. We're having trouble wrapping our head around the idea of autonomous vehicles right now. advancing the technology, but demand, at least the studies I've seen, demand indicates that demand's nowhere near where it needs to be to make the technology viable in market. So people distrust machines, and so if we start involving machines more deeply in the electoral process, we're going to have to change that perception. Otherwise, people aren't going to trust the result. And then with regard to machines, they can be far more objective than humans, but only if the database is unbiased. And so we go through an awful lot of trouble trying to make sure that bias doesn't get introduced into databases, but recognize that some of our early AI implementations, facial recognition, failed on bias. We had people of color showing up as apes and animals, and really was not, and particularly women of color were miscategorized broadly, and that set back facial recognition technology rather dramatically. We've got now large movements trying to block facial recognition, both in the U.S. and through most of the rest of the world, as a result of those early failed experiments. Now we can create databases that are very accurate. It goes back down to the training set, but you have to start with the idea that you understand how biases are going to be introduced, and then eliminate those biases at the source. If you don't acknowledge the biases, then you're going to have a biased data set. The AI will be biased, and all you will have created is an artificial intelligence, or an intelligence, if you will, that just makes mistakes at machine speeds, which doesn't do anybody any good. What you don't want to do is create a system that errs at a higher rate than humans do, to such an extent that a human could mitigate it. That's kind of the AI end of the world model, and it's not a good one. A lot of the simulations indicate it wouldn't take much automated factory that could self-resource, that just simply got out of control, could do a tremendous amount of damage if it could self-replicate. So working through the process of assuring that the data isn't compromised, assuring that people trust the AI to make the right decision, and do recognize that, we see this all the time. You and I might see the same decision and view it completely differently, depending on our own biases. So the other difficulty we've got is, even if we did create an AI that was totally unbiased, there's a pretty good chance that most of us would look at the decisions the AI made and determine by the nature of the decision the AI must be biased because it decided against what we thought it should have decided. So our own biases affect the viability of an AI, even if the AI is unbiased. So we've got some learning to do, and we're nowhere near where we need to be to deploy the technology. We can make the technology viable. There's no doubt in that. We as humans are not ready for a viable decision-making AI, at least not at scale.
Excellent. Mr. Adam.
Thank you, Sharif. Well, let's talk a little bit more about some of the transhumanist stuff. Well, one of the biggest tropes in that kind of school of thought is convergence, everything coming together, unifying, namely the singularity, professed by people like Nick Bostrom and Ray Kurzweil, who both seem to, in my eyes, to drop off the radar a little bit for the past couple of years. Before then, you saw their names quite frequently bouncing around and circulating, and then they seemed to lay low for a bit, and then recently they re-emerged. I mean, Kurzweil's just come out with a new book, and I saw Bostrom again recently talking about, I think it was global superconsciousness, and if we seem to be closer to that goal technologically, I don't think we are sociologically. As the comment sections were still full of people disgusted and freaked out by such ideas, just like they were years before. And I think people are, like Professor Rob was saying, are now even more distrustful, actually, maybe because of recent events, current events, and events yet to come. And secondly, I just wanted to address something a bit more mundane than fantastical AI, namely praising the cloud. The thing about the cloud is it's really advantageous for everyone. My mother has felt the consequences of the seeming built-in obsolescence that modern devices seem to be fitted with. She went through a couple of iPhone models, generational versions. Amazing the vast chasm separating modern technology with technology marketed decades ago. In the UK, we have a little maxim, built to last, and a washing machine built in the 1950s could last decades longer than a washing machine bought out today, which might only last a couple of years. You could count on a single hand at most, despite being more computerized than the former, or even because of this increased computerization, which seems to make machines a lot more fragile. the first time an iPhone started to malfunction for my mother, she wasn't tied into the cloud, and she had hundreds of photographs that she didn't get around to backing up manually. And recently she lost her latest phone by putting it on top of a parked car. She got in, turned the engine on, started driving, and of course the phone comes tumbling off, gets run over by a few cars before she noticed what happened, and she went to salvage it. And it was damaged, but still mainly in one piece, but very, very cracked. And again, she had hundreds of photos on this model, which were saved and backed up onto the cloud automatically, and we all breathed a sigh of relief because we can all remember how upset she was before, after the first time it has happened, which wasn't her fault, but leaving her phone on the roof of her car kind of was her fault. But the results were fortunately much kinder to her sensibilities, thank goodness. And it seems like every other person who has an iPhone has a cracked screen. Mine's still intact. My cover is a bit cracked. So of course, people are so busy now. They sometimes forget to do some of the peripheral tasks like backing up your data. And so to have it outsourced to an automatic task is very helpful, especially when we can fit more and more data on, more and more photos, videos, text documents, audio, music notes, work tasks, and more quickly at that. So the task of making sure it's all saved and secured against data wiping crashes becomes more and more daunting the bigger it gets. So people have a tendency to procrastinate, push things back again and again. If not today, then when? Then, as the saying goes. Or after you've lost it all, sometimes. So to have facilities like the cloud are definitely a godsend for all of us. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you, Professor David Smith.
You're muted.
Yeah, the discussions have been so interesting, particularly around the world of politics on this, that I kind of think to put it in a slightly different context on this. If you look back in the problem, not just with AI and the cloud and the processing, it really brings us back to a lot of the challenge here is data. How do we work with data? How do we integrate data? How do we learn from it? How do we create algorithms to work with and things? And the really interesting thing here is if you look at the last 2 years and the last 2 years before that and the last 2 years before that, in each of those 2-year periods, we're generating more data than from the start of where we've collected data. And so the data growth across these systems is really steep and it's very sharp. And in many ways, we're in the age of data. And data is the central business asset of most companies today. Data is the only sole non-deletable, non-degrading, doable access they have. And I have a thing I use when I give talks on data and the future of data. And I like to say I have the oldest quote that's going to be used at the conference. And I go back to Herodotus from 500 BC. And he said that all things are flowing. And the way I interpret that is data is born digitally and it flows constantly. And that's what makes clouds so important as you look at clouds and big data and AI, is the data is flowing and it's flowing constantly. Data at rest has lower value than data in motion. Data where you're actively using it to make decisions, take actions against it. And you see that really working across all data. And I have actually proposed that data and AI have given us a new scientific paradigm, a new discipline. 1,000 years ago, the discipline was experimental science. In the last few hundred years, it's been theoretical science. If I go back and look at from about 1980 through about 2010, it was computational science. But today, I think we're in data intensive science. And this data intensive science is actually beginning to surpass what we have as we look at our means to understand it, manipulate it, the data processing that's needed. And even we're seeing new ways of storage that are going back to biological basis, trying to keep up with the amount of storage we need to have in the cloud and with the big data applications. And we're advancing AI so rapidly that quantum artificial intelligence tools are right on the horizon now to be able to deal with this massive growth of data. And it's the data that's the driver. The data is the driver of the cloud. The data is the driver of AI. And data has become even more the driver of a computational fabric than actually the number crunching that was the key back in computational science. So I think that's one of the big changes you have coming.
Excellent. Dr. William, you are political analyst. As for my knowledge, Mr. Tom Rose actually very popular in developing nations because he is doing a lot of work in Africa, even in Asia Pacific, especially for the developing nations. And definitely all of you are very great because all of your contribution actually supporting a lot to the developing nations. On the other hand, we have some challenges, especially political corruptions and this and that. So last week we had a big debate that AI can solve these things. Even personally, I don't mind if any of the AI systems and something come to the politics and some of the political corruption or system error removed by AI. But what do you think? What about the US politics? And do you think the US people will accept this kind of revolutionary idea when Mr. Tom said that he will bring in AI as his running mate for the US election?
Okay, well, actually, Tom, my ear started to wiggle when you first mentioned that, and then we saw your opening screenshot. Very impressive, by the way, and I'm a bit jealous, but don't mind me. I think the way I'd want to approach this is simply bifurcating the two. What I hear the question to be initially is, how will AI help us say with corruption? And that seems to me to be a question more of the allocation of resources, and it fits more in the model of governing when you actually have to make choices. And in that regard, artificial intelligence, when backed by big data in a real time feedback situation, where you can actually make decisions for governing with the allocation of resources. Yes, there is a time and a place to do that. And as to the acceptability of the American public in this small sliver of the world, it's been done all the time. I mean, it's being done with just-in-time deliveries, production schedules, everything we see in the manufacturing business and or retail. So that's really not so much of an issue, at least as so far as I see it. I am curious, Tom, and this is the first thing that came to my mind. When you raised the notion, and this is the political side, raised the notion of having a non-human intelligence as a political figure, but beginning with crowdsourcing campaign decisions. The first thing that struck me was all you need to do is go back to the 2004 campaign and the Howard Dean campaign, because that was the first nexus point of the usage of the internet connecting to people in a lateral collection. And real briefly, because I worked for the Dean campaign, but quite frankly, essentially what it was is that historically campaigns have been a top-down organizational model. A few people at the top making decisions and then laying it out for the rest of the people. In 2004, with the Dean campaign, it was the first time because the internet allowed for this community type of access, which we now know and call crowdsourcing, to actually come in and vote with their dollars about where the campaign wanted to go. And it took the campaign to be responsive. So in that respect, Tom, crowdsourcing for campaign decisions, I think is a fascinating idea, because you're going to be able to use big data in real time when you go out and you find the people that want to sign up and engage in your 3-year-long study. But it's more of crowdsourcing for campaign decisions. And you just got to look back to see what the model was done. Now, albeit with very big caveat, 2004 is like the Stone Age in terms of where we're at now. So I find that really interesting. But I guess when it comes to AI and governing, here's the issue. And I'll just start with this really brief vignette. One of the staff at the University of Wisconsin, with the chancellor, the president of the university. He explained to me that my job was essentially this. My job was to make his job easier. And that is to say that all the issues that were going on at the university, whether it was the faculty, the students, student affairs, athletics department, whatever it is, it came to my desk. And my job was, in an evaluative format, to decide what the priorities were. And if a solution could be discerned and then dealt with, then that was that was dispositive. That was my role. Now, anything that I could not deal with, then it went up to the president's desk. So, in some respect, when we talk about artificial intelligence, assuming we can get over the human interface, which I know Rob is fond of describing, that is natural language and making sure that it's seamless and helping them understand the context and nuance of words. Assuming we can pass that, it's whether we can design a general AI that collects all of this data that David is working on, and within the context, in an evaluative way, say this is more important than that, given all of this information. Because as I see it right now, it's really this, that with AI, currently where we stand is this. AI, whether it's through Google or anything else, they come into a single, and this is a benefit, they can come into a single platform. You type into Google, one user face. It comes to me, I'm your virtual assistant. You say, hey, Bill, I'd like to know about what? I go over here, I grab a book, or I already know of these books, and I just say, hey, listen, you don't have to go to the book stacks. I've got it all right here. That's different than, hey, Bill, I want to know about this, but what do you think I should do? Therein lies the rub. It's the evaluative process. And which is why, Tom, I'm so curious, because if you do crowdsourcing campaign decisions for an artificial intelligent or non-human intelligent running mate, I have no idea what the future holds, but I find it absolutely fascinating. Sorry.
Yes, Mr.
I apologize.
Mr. Tom, even actually we sharing today's sessions to our local media. There are even our partners, Mr. Julkifli, he's even editors for Malaysian local newspaper Star Online. They are really interested about these declarations, especially when AI coming to the politics, and you are bringing these discussions today. So, how you want to analyze your position? Why are you thinking that you do not need human, you need AI for your running mate?
No, we actually do need the humans. And I like the idea of crowdsourcing these decisions. In a way, the idea is to use the collective intelligence. We have a system that is Uplift, that we will also have our own source code to build our own running mate in this fashion. And that's collective intelligence. What it is, it's a mediated artificial superintelligence. It requires human beings to mediate with it, and that's the crowd that is sourcing this information. So the idea is, one of the ideas is to I'll have 6 experts who will have 6 cabinet seats. Once all is said and done, if necessary. Not that I'll ever win, but the idea is to have 6 team members who have their own mediation group of human beings connected to this collective intelligence. And so it's just part of their team. They will head the team, they will head the mediation group. And in that mediation group includes this collective intelligence, a really good member of the team, a genius member of the team. Anyway, so what these 6 people will do will focus on very specific areas, because the point of this whole campaign is my fight against child exploitation. That's the MacGuffin of this story. And we don't have to wait 3 years to do anything. I've got an initiative I'm going to propose to get at least one major social media company to use their data and their AI, advanced AI, for a limited time to do this, to mobilize this assault on these networks. That's all being worked out. So, and I'll get all the legalities figured out before I present that. But for me, this is the best use of AI, because it requires humans. It requires our mediation. It takes in that data. It gives it emotional balances. It's learning emotions is one of the primary aspects of this particular collective intelligence. And so it is. It's a very narrow crowdsourced collective intelligence information that we'll gather. And I'm assuming the trend lines of everything. Within 3 years, things are going to be completely different than they are now. Within 6 years, whatever it is, at some point we will have an artificial general intelligence that we can speak to, like you're speaking to me, that will be able to access all of its quality of information, data, and actually be very, very useful member of the team. And so this is just a way to push that envelope, to pave that way. I'm not saying that I'm going to put a robot as my running mate, as the vice president. Should I die, a robot will take office. No, this is a way. That's a stunt, if you will, to say it that way. But I really mean that. I would love to have a robot AI as my running mate. But the putting that out there, and the processes and the learning and the questions this will all bring up will be very valuable. I've got no intention of winning. I'd have no desire to win. Who wants that job? I don't want to preside over you lot. But what this will allow me to do is three things. I'll be able to, we can stress test the system for a collective intelligence system and help integrate it. By using it for this particular cause, my one plank is to fight child exploitation. I've got one very detailed concept that we can start talking about in a few months to do this. Because that's when people are talking about child exploitation, there's no room for ego. And people aren't afraid of any tool or information or data that will help solve that problem. And so that's the whole point, is focusing this whole campaign on my cause. That's my cause. That's why I talk about AI and alleviating the fear of AI, because AI is a very massive tool to use to fight this crime. We can't be afraid of the one thing that can really disrupt this whole industry. It's what my book is about. It's all about us six in the end. Spoiler alert, means the six of us six children that have created this paracosm to deal with the fact that they are trapped in this horrific, human trafficking network. So everything I do is about this effort. And I think it's very important that we alleviate the fear. I don't mind putting myself out there and being the guy that's criticized for trying to put a robot in office. That's fine. My reputation is weird anyway. It just only helps me. But I do think it's very important for somebody to start doing this, to start putting this out there, start asking these questions before we need to ask these questions. We're going to learn so much in this process, just not only by building the running mate, but by seeking out the biases that we're talking about. And that's a very big part of this project, is eliminating as many biases as possible in this machine. Anyway, so that's the whole point, is to use this whole mechanism, use this whole platform to do the reason I joined the USTP in the first place was their Section 23, which has very specific ideas and policies to fight human trafficking and child rights and sentient rights in general. And that was the whole thing that attracted me to this movement in the first place. And so this is the perfect kind of culmination of all these projects I've been working on in the last few years. Hey, why not run for president and enact all these things and put all these things out there? Have the questions and the conversations, the hard but inspiring conversations that we absolutely need to have right now. And I'm sure I'm going to be getting all kinds of ridicule, but I don't care. That's what this is all about.
Yes.
Bring it.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Excellent, Dr. William.
Tom, just a bit of advice so that you can focus on the higher questions. Just make sure that your running mate is completely made in America, so that it's a born here in the you can avoid, any those issues, and you can.
Yeah, there are issues like it has to have resided here for 14 years, so that's going to be tough.
As long as it's made in America, then we can get over that argument. Sorry.
So, Tom, you need to go back to 8088 chipsets, okay?
Okay. I think everyone will support Mr. Tom. I'm not US citizen. I'm an Adam, but there is more US citizen. They can negotiate and they can discuss. I don't know. You can take care of Mr. Tom. Professor Donald. Yes.
Well, I
Unmute,
think
please.
this is a very interesting direction. I want to mention just something that's worth thinking about is when you're using Facebook, you could have an instant conversation with people. You can talk to anybody in the world. We do it all the time, don't we, Sharif? People that are on this panel talk to Sharif. So um, it's really quite an amazing thing that they managed to instantly store that much data and access that data. So it's not, if you're thinking about technically what winds up going on, in other words, making this stuff, it's really worth looking into how file systems work and how this data works, because they're constantly inventing new forms. Like originally the distributed database was called Hadoop, and over time Hadoop has kind of faded away because it hasn't faded away because there was huge installations that were done in it, but it's become legacy. And there's newer and newer ways of doing this. It's fascinating and really worth looking into. I want to echo what Dan said, which is that AI isn't really AI. Basically, the way a neural network works is I learned how to do this from Dave Huffman in college, way back in the 80s or late 70s. Neural nets and the ability to create neural nets to recognize patterns is very old technology. I mean, relatively. However, the problem was that in which you have one of the way you do it is you basically have an array. On one side of the array is a list of the nodes. Both x and y axis are lists of nodes. To show that a node is connected with each other, you put something there like 1, and everything else is 0. And as the information comes in, those numbers change from 1 to 2 or 3, and they're given weights, like which is, if it's going down the neural path, it doesn't fire unless there's enough weight at that particular node to be able to have the data continue, or the information. And that basically means you have to look at every node in the array every time you do something. So what wound up happening is people realized that all a screen was just a big array. And for each pixel on the screen, there's originally 8, and now I don't even know how many, at least 64 possible numbers attached to that. And so what happened was they started using video cards, and they're called GPUs instead of CPUs. And video cards allow you to manage arrays at blinding speeds. I mean, fast enough that you could use it. And so what a deep learning is that the data comes in, the patterns, and then one array looks at it, and then it passes it off to the next array, and it passes it off to the next array, and so on. And so we can technically do those things. But really, there's 2 things about that. One is we don't actually know what the deep learning arrays are doing. We don't really have a way of monitoring them. So if we're trying to debug something, it's kind of difficult so we don't actually know what they're doing in real time. Another thing about it is what are they doing? They're just recognizing patterns. So that's being used in politics heavily, because Obama, when he was running, was the first to really take the data that he could get from public sources, and Facebook is somewhat open about that. And then find the people that were most likely to be on the fence about voting to him, and then target those people. And then when Trump came along, he did a much better job at that, because he had this actually very unpleasant guy that was running his quote AI. And what they're doing is they have algorithms that learn to recognize different kinds of patterns. And so they find that, well, somebody who writes a lot about, pro-gun and anti-vax or something like that is going to be a perfect candidate to vote for Republicans. And that's been being done for quite a while, and it's going to keep being done. And so I just want to emphasize that really all AI isn't intelligent in any way, and it doesn't know language in any way. When you talk to Alexa, I have Alexa, I always say, Alexa, do X, Y, and Z. Alexa, get me this, or Alexa, do this. And because I'm doing that, I know that the first word that comes after Alexa is going to be a verb. And then once I know that, I can start guessing what kinds of things follow that verb. But if I say something to it like, the man Sally saw climbing a tree, it can't do that, because there's two verbs in it, and it doesn't know which verb goes with which nouns, and it can't do it. So just that is such a simple thing that humans do all the time. It can't even do basic syntax. And then what meaning is a whole entirely different thing. Much more complicated.
Thank you. Professor Rob, I know you have a special meeting. That's why I want to ask you this question because of subject matter. Developing nations, because many political parties, they communicate with World Talent Economy Forum, because developing nations, they have a highly dependency on developed nations for policy development. Okay, and we saw there are many ups and downs and many challenges and many problems and many issues actually happening. Example, JICA helped Bangladesh to develop their energy policy. So this is an example. I just want to create the plot. But my question is that in the future, when we discussing that AI will join in politics as a running mate, so in the futures, like AI can develop better policy, what do you think? Is it possible? Like it can solve this problem?
Well, possible versus probable. So recognize anything's possible with regard to artificial intelligence. The advantage we've got as we move forward is the ability to do a simulation. So if we can do simulation at scale. So for instance, when we're talking autonomous cars, and when you're training an autonomous car, you can put it through years of driving training in a matter of minutes. Because you run simulations, and you can run the simulations at machine speeds. And so instead of having days lasting 24 hours, a day could last 2.5 seconds, or less. And the end result is you can train an AI very rapidly. And so an AI could be incredibly good with regard to policy decisions. But you would need a general purpose AI. And right now, best projections are we don't get general purpose AIs until after 2035, probably closer to 2040. So the capability of an AI to be a vice president or a politician at the very earliest would be 2040, and it's probably going to be quite a bit after that, because you still have to turn around the conceptions of the perceptions of the people that might vote for it, and you'd have to deal with a whole lot of things. For instance, none of the laws were written with the idea of AIs in political office, so that would all have to be redone. But in terms of being able to develop better policy, yes, if you build in simulation, you could say, for instance, if you were going to have a particular tax policy, assuming you set up the simulation properly, you could implement the variables. You want to make sure that you keep stuff pretty isolated, so you're testing one thing at a time. If you're testing multiple things at a time, you get interaction between the variables, and they can be very difficult to determine which thing had the greater impact. But as long as you do the testing properly, then you can, before you roll the policy out, determine what the impact of that policy is going to be. Now, and this of course brings us back to bias. Is the simulation has to be realistic. You have to work through the interaction of the variables so that they occur as if they would occur in real life. Because if they don't, if you've modified it in some way, and remember, a lot of times with politicians, they don't ask a question because they want to know the answer. They ask a question because they want to have confirmation that the decision they've already made is accurate. By the way, that's the big problem with a lot of people that are on the internet now that say, we've researched this and it's accurate. No, all they did is validate what it is they already believed. It's called confirmation bias, and all they did is advance their bias and support it with dubious facts. So you've got to make sure the AI does not do that. The AI's got to approach a decision clean, has to do the analytics work, run the simulations, come back with a recommendation, and that recommendation has to be completely unbiased and as accurate as possible. Otherwise, what you expect to happen based on the simulation will not happen in real life, and all you do again is create bad policy at machine speeds. So it's a matter of working through the process. I would argue our political structure really is not set up for AI use right now, because it's far more likely a politician will take a position, will then turn to the AI to validate that position, and all you're doing is making something wrong appear more right. And that's not what you want to do in this particular case. You want to make sure the decision is the right decision, the focus on correctness, not their focus on upholding somebody's already preset opinion. And so there lies, I think, the biggest difficulty with regard to AI. And then I have to go because, as you point out, I've got a meeting to run to, and we'll chat later.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Thank you, Mr. Dan. So, Professor Rob actually bring very important point that U.S. politics actually ready for taking taking AI as their running mate. Yes, I know that every revolutionary idea has a lot of challenges, but we believe in talent economy. We believe in transhumanist concept. So definitely, this is highly appreciable. How actually Mr. Tom Rose bring the idea to the to our platform, and if he is successful. Personally, I will be very happy because I saw how he contributing different part of the world, and I'm sure they will be very happy. I don't know if they get into the U.S. citizenship or something, maybe he can get millions and million vote. Okay, this is different issues anyway. So, what's your view?
Yeah, I mean, this is a ready-made press release topic. I mean, Tom is going to be deluged with requests for interviews. I mean, oh, here's something new: yes. A guy running a robot for president.
Already in Malaysia, it's turned news, and everyone we are sharing our things.
You guys are breaking the story. Wow, this is like great for WTEF as well. It's like. But I'm with Tom on this. I mean, politics is already using big data and machine learning like crazy behind the scenes. It's just not talked about, and the public isn't involved. Nixon, who was kind of the archetypal corrupt politician, he had a quote where he said, "Politics would be a great racket if the public weren't involved." He got into politics basically answering a classified ad for some crooked kinds of folks, and we need to reform politics. I mean, I'm doing with my city council run. I'm playing a long game here. Okay, when you get a public comment, when you want to make a public comment, the city council meeting gives you 3 minutes. So I see running as kind of getting to expand my public comment period and put new ideas into what's called the Overton window. This is a phrase that describes what it's okay to discuss. There are certain things that are on the table that you see on the news and you hear talked about. Certain things are outside that Overton window, and no, we just don't go there because that's just too far out and weird. And so I think we're constantly challenged with trying to move the Overton window fast enough to keep up with the threats that humanity is facing. So I'm looking at my voting record. I'm doubling every cycle. So if this keeps up, I'll be on the council in 2026, and that's fine. I'll probably have a really great policy evolved by 2026. And I'm keeping the money out of politics by not spending any. I think ideas should be winning in politics on their own merit. All the other candidates, they spent like $70,000, $80,000 for a job that pays $1,200 a month. So it's like, why are politicians spending these exorbitant amounts of money to get jobs that obviously are not going to be the return on investment that they spent? There's obviously all kinds of fixes that are in, whether it's, you get the ego massage of having a great public servant title, or you've got some developers that are lurking that say, oh, we got our guy in there now and he's going to do what we want. So I like to take the idea of big data and flip it on its head. What we need is small data, actually. There are 2 billion people that, or more, I think some say it's as high as 40% of the human population that is on the other side of the digital divide, the dark side. They don't have access to the global conversation that's going on in the digital universe. So that's something that we should address, because think of all the human talent that is dormant there. I mean, it's like, what is it, like 3 billion people that if they were trained and involved and civically engaged, think of the problems we could solve. Because, among those people are how many Da Vinci's or Einsteins. This is part of the transhumanist philosophy, is that the human resource is our greatest resource. And I'll save something for my concluding remarks. Thanks again, Sharif.
Okay. Yes, Professor David Smith.
I love the topic, and it got me thinking about having an AI enhanced humanoid as my assistant as well. And I'm speaking at some of the conferences, and I could let it be on stage, and I'll talk from the audience side, and we should be able to hold the interest that way. But I love the topic, and it's so easy to shift through the different phases of it. We began the day talking about the cloud and the importance of the cloud. We've shifted across what is or is not artificial intelligence. And to me, artificial intelligence is such a big term that it has very little meaning, and you have to talk about the parts and pieces to really understand it. And now we've gotten into applications of AI and applications of it through our political system, our work systems, and others. And to me, the very best AI is AI that's almost invisible. AI that makes you wonder how the decisions are made, but they're so in tune with what you want and what your desires are. And it's AI that lets you look at a broader set of data than before. As Donald probably will say, the early artificial intelligence was all built around structured data. And structured data is fine, but if I look in the average company today, about 80% of their data is in something called unstructured data. And it's the unstructured data where you get the nuances. If I were to use an AI in politics with you, Tom, I would want to make sure it understands the unstructured data a lot more than the structured data, and that it can begin to understand the intangibles as well as the tangibles. Humans excel at understanding the intangibles, and we need to do the same thing with our tools and our systems and that. And part of that goes, again, like so many things, back to education. We have to broaden what we mean in our education as we deal with data. I love the term big data. To a small retailer, a big data might be a terabyte, where some of the work I did in the intelligence agencies, they collected yottabytes of data every day. And so to me, that's big data. And most of the other data is large, but not big data. And you begin to look at what you do with that and the decisions you make on it. And sometimes a lot of data is worse than a good amount of data as it comes to making decisions, because it complicates how you can do them. And I love the idea of using AI as part of what we're trying to do, but the vast reality is we've used AI in some form or fashion since the mid 60s, with very simple type of if-then statements, because if-then statement is a form of AI. And you begin to do it with things like that. So I think it's a great future, but we're going to continue to learn, continue to progress. And we need to train people on the ways to look across the data. As Rob said earlier, the bias is what gets us in artificial intelligence. The bias is what hurts us as we look at big data. And we need to look at the tools to do it. And Tom, for your campaign, let me give you a framework I love to use that is perfectly appropriate as we look at how big data and AI and everything evolves. In my futurist work, I believe there's a framework of 6 ways to look at the future. You're an extrapolator, pattern analyst, goal analyst, counterpuncher, intuitor, or an artist. Each of those have different tools underneath them. And when I'm trying to put my futurist hat, or actually even make decisions about today, I want to use each of those different views of that framework. I think if AI was written to use a framework similar to that, it would take a lot of the bias out. It would cancel error out, which is what it does in my futurist work, in my hard problem roadmaps we do. And that is something I think that as we further develop artificial intelligence, as we further develop what we do with big data, and the ability to do it in the cloud and distribute it makes it even easier. I hope that's part of the future we're heading towards.
Thank you. Professor Donald.
I want to say that I would vote for. I would vote for Dan for our city council, and not even care what his platform was, because it'd be so nice to have somebody that was actually intelligent on the city council. It would be a win. But that being said, I want to point out something interesting about big data is that a lot of it is garbage. Basically, imagine that you're filling out a form and they ask you what state you live in, and you type it in instead of having it a list. Well, people are going to spell it every way under the sun. I did a data thing where I was asking people that I had to have them physically name their town because there's so many towns, I couldn't really make a list of them. And the data, you have to spend a lot of time cleaning up the data to be able to use it. And I know that because I worked for a company that did fraud detection for Bank of America and Barclays. And that was one of their huge challenges, is that think about it. If you're going to compare two things, they have to have the same structure. So David pointed out the data is unstructured, but that's really what that means, is that the way they store it is they basically have a key and a value. So they don't assign types to the data. But then when you get the data out of the database, you have to structure it, because you can't compare things unless they're similar enough. And besides the bias, I think that something that I like to emphasize a lot is the bias. That Daniel Kahneman wrote this book called Heuristics and Biases, about the biases we have as human beings. And those are shortcuts that we use to be able to make decisions, and they're not necessarily bad, because there's a whole idea of logic and rationality and things, but you know, it was the most important thing in the world in the 1770s, and we've come a long way in being able to develop different kinds of logics, and ultimately at this point, even more advanced things like Bayesian logics and things like that they're still very far from what we do as human beings, and they're normative. It just the thing that Rob was talking about how when you do facial recognition, you have to train it. And so everything gets trained, and you have to pick to yourself, well, this is the desirable input to train this. And Amazon had an idea that what they were going to do is develop the perfect AI to look at resumes and decide from the resumes which people were most likely to be good Amazon employees. So what they used as training data was all the really good Amazon employees. but Amazon had been hiring white men. And so when they started looking at the resumes, it just immediately tossed out women and people of color. And so they had to give up on that. That didn't work at all. And I want to say one other thing about how human beings make decisions is that ultimately they're emotional. And so I checked at what they're doing with emotions at MIT, and I have a friend who works with this also doing user interfaces. And what they're doing is there's kind of a theory that that there's a basic emotions, and it was this theory by a guy named Paul Ekman. They made a show kind of based on him called Lie to Me, where the people were these great experts and they could just look at somebody's body language and faces and decide whether they were lying or not. Well, it turns out that Ekman did not share his data and his other kinds of sources, so no one really knows how Ekman came to his conclusions, and no one's ever tested Ekman to find out if he really is better at anybody else than detecting lying. But he would be unique because people aren't very good at that. And so what they're doing is they're recognizing certain patterns, which may or may not be universal. Ekman went around and did some studies that made him say that these 7 emotions were basic and universal, but subsequently people have found counter evidence that this is not true. And when we have emotions, what's going on is that there's these neural networks called interoceptive networks, and it's the networks we have of feelings inside, like if our stomach, if we're scared, we get a feeling, and if we're happy, we get a feeling, and it's got to do with the neurochemicals that are being released in our brains, and the names that we have for them are just the names that are in our particular culture or society. Some societies have more emotions or fewer emotions. So emotions are something that they're socially constructed. I mean, they're not actual things. So the way that they're doing it is basically what they're trying to do is the same kind of thing. It's for marketing. So what they can do is they can look and see from a fake person's face, they can guess, and they don't always get it right, but they get it right more often than not, that this person's upset or they're happy about the message or whatever. They can detect evidence of emotions in people, and they're using it. It can be used in politics for being able to sell things to people, to give them a message at a time when they're in a physical state that allows them to be more receptive to the message. But we're doing that. I mean, we've been doing it for a long time. As David said, there's I know some incredible stuff people are doing with advertising right now on the internet, where they're using social networks to decide what people's values are. Like if somebody orders a gun and whiskey, they know something about that person, and then they know who that person's connected to, and because of that, they know how to target messages even to people they don't have that much data on. So it's an interesting kettle of fish right now.
Thank you. I directly want to go for the concluding remarks for today. I want to start from my friend Mr. Adam.
Thank you, Sharif. I just wanted to commend Mr. Tom Ross on fighting the issue of child exploitation, and social media platforms do help facilitate it. And we, of course, with anonymous or semi-anonymous communication channels and apps like Telegram, Wicker, Signal, it's now more opportune than ever before to operate within some shady market deep in the underbelly of modern society, to mention the deep web and the dark web and so on. There are a lot of very interesting documentaries and documentary-style podcast shows that report on the darkest sides of online trading and black market activities. There are no shades of grey here. This is evil, capital E. which is interesting because I think a lot of people fall into the bias and remain trapped in the bias that we are on a nice, neat trajectory from an unenlightened dark age where life was nasty, brutish, and short, up and up to a far more enlightened, tolerant, fair, and open-minded civilization with this bright utopian attractor waiting for us to find it after we have left behind all the worst aspects of our species. And I think the existence of social justice and wokeism deceive many people into thinking that this is the case, when in fact human civilization and enterprise and endeavor is, I think, cyclic, and maybe dark ages are never truly escaped from. It's just that the scenery changes, things are shuffled around a bit, someone else fills a power vacuum left behind by some tyrant, and this new successor makes more empty promises and platitudes for people who forget that this is how the previous tyrant got into power in the first place, and so on. Perhaps we never do truly escape from dark ages. We simply just go from one shade of dark to a different shade of dark. Which sounds contradictory and a bit nonsensical, but for the sake of this discussion, I personally think that we are devolving in some ways, and I can't decide whether there is more suffering in the world, or social media and the internet just exposes more evil and suffering than before. But the quantity could be more or less the same. I'm not quite sure which one it is, but that's irrelevant, actually. I mean, evil is evil, it's there, and no matter how much or how little evil there is or is not, it doesn't change the fact that something must be done about it. But like I hinted at before, I have a hunch that platforms like EncroChat, used by criminal gangs, social media, both exoteric and esoteric, differing levels of online access, I do have a hunch that this makes black market actors, what I like to call suffering economics, more confident and competent in their dealings and trades. So suffering economics like child trafficking, sex rings, child porn, obviously, and so on. So the digital tech we discussed can make these underworld gangs more competent and confident in their dealings. Although it might well be a chicken and egg scenario, which I've mentioned before, if black market underworld members can more quickly do their activities in a more anonymized environment behind layers of encryption and false identities and VPNs. And does that mean that police, detectives, intelligence agencies can use technology to catch these criminals more quickly and more accurately with more triangulation techniques? But if emerging tech allows for the prevention of extreme suffering in more advanced ways, more effective ways, then that comes first, I think. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you. Dr. William, what's your concluding remarks?
Yes, actually, I have two. First, I just have a comment with on big data with Dave, and that's really this that it can't be underscored enough that if you have the wrong database or a biased database, and forgive me, Dave, I'm going out on a limb here. Rather than AI, I think you have AS, artificial stupidity. But that's merely an inside joke. I think, though, that what I'd rather go with is simply this, and it's to end with a question. So far, we've been looking at the idea of AI in its various forms, whether it's augmented intelligence or artificial intelligence, from the viewpoint of potentially reach the holy grail through the computers and making the computers more human-like. I guess my question really, and I apologize for stepping out earlier, I had to grab something real quick, but my question really is for Adam and Dan to mull over. And that is, can't we tackle this problem from both ends? And how do we build a humanist artificial intelligence person? I mean, what would that look like? I mean, how would you go about starting and building an AI who was a humanist, rather than coming at what we're currently doing, which is we're trying to use a computer based model with data to try to create a humanistic kind of a non-human intelligence. What if we started and looked at the question a different way? And I guess that was just for Adam and Dan for a later point in time. So with that question, I would just leave that for the audience. But I do want to thank everybody, because I found this incredibly thoughtful and I've learned a great deal. Sharif?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks?
Love the topic. Love what we're doing. I believe the topic today is a fundamental foundation piece. that most business, most government, most academic institutions, most entrepreneurship activities can be built upon. And it's one that is going to allow us to accelerate these going forward. To use the group intelligence that comes in place from using these tools and implementing them broadly and sharing the data broadly will allow us to accelerate and allow us to evolve uh, what we're doing in each of our domains more rapidly. So, Sharif, one of your great topics, and thank you so much for letting me be part of it.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Donald, what's your concluding remarks today?
As always, it's always so interesting talking to these guys. It's a lot of fun. I want to kind of go back to the theme that I have and emphasize that it's important to understand what we call AI is actually doing. It's I really recommend that you read the philosopher Thomas Quine. He has a book called Words and Objects, where he absolutely shows that when I say something and you say something, we're not saying the same thing. We're not. Our nervous systems are different. We have different brains. We have different experiences. So the meaning of what we're saying is always going to be slightly different. So what's incredible to look at when you're really starting to think about intelligence is how is it that we still communicate given that? You can't look up the meaning of a word. I mean, you sort of can, but that doesn't really tell you. That's got little to do with the language and the way language works. We can simulate it. There's an experiment by a philosopher named John Searle called the Chinese room problem. And what he asked is, okay, you slip Chinese characters on a paper under the door to a person inside, and they have some dictionaries to look up what the best response is to that particular character, and then they slip that outside of the door. Is that intelligent? No, it's not. And so that's what we're basically doing is just taking the words and then looking up the best response for the particular words we use. There's no intelligence there. And so I want to emphasize the danger of that, which is that you can figure out what the most common patterns are and then deviations from the patterns, and that's really what it's doing. And then act on that in some sort of a way. And it's being used everywhere now to manipulate us. And what it's trying to manipulate us to be is to be the same. And it's kind of insidious. If you're a developing country, I mean, if you're a person that's really interested in artificial intelligence or intelligence, study neuroscience, philosophy, psychology, and sociology, because those are the fields that'll show you how complicated human beings are, how much incredibly more complicated than what we call AI now, and allow you to start adding to what we know now and get it closer to what it might potentially be in a long time. I think saying 2040 is very optimistic. I think it's going to be quite a longer than it's just like self-driving cars. We're going to happen in 2 years. Self-driving cars are 2 years in the future, always have been and always will be. So I'm just kidding because I think they'll get better. But anyway, that's what the main thing I want to say is to realize the data, as William said, the data is only as good as it is. There's an old joke, I mean, really old, from like the 70s, which is that a computer can misfile millions of pieces of information in seconds. Which is kind of what we worry about, and we I don't really know how to approach the problem of the like it rejects loans from people of color more often than it rejects loans from white people. There's just all these things that are going on that are kind of under what we see, that I hope we can start really focusing on and trying to see how it's affecting society.
Thank you, Mr. Dan. Thank you.
Yeah, big issues. And in conclusion, yeah, that's a great point that we've got these tools that are mistake amplifiers. And they're not only doing that, but they're also, ignoring unknowns, and they're making us all similar. They're, one of the great things about humanity is our uniqueness and our difference and our capacity for imagination. Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. So we won't have AI until we have computers that, or entities that do those kinds of things. And maybe that will be a dark day or a good day. It's like Arthur C. Clarke said, there are two possibilities. Both are equally horrifying. Either we're alone in the universe or we are not. So that kind of applies to AI. Either we will come up with human level general AI, or we won't. I don't know. I could live with not doing it, actually. But so I don't know if AI counts on the level of an ET. But Isaac Asimov had the 3 laws of robotics that he hoped they would abide by. A robot must obey all commands given by a human. A robot must protect human life, and a robot must protect its own life unless it conflicts with the first 2 laws. I think, did I get that right? I think I got that right. Anyway,
robotics, yeah.
Yeah, written back in the 40s, the 50s. So yeah, science fiction has been dealing with these issues for decades before. But it's interesting. The one thing that science fiction never foresaw correctly was the personal computer. They always envisioned that computers would be these giant, apartment-sized complexes run by giant authorities, in the cities, in the centers of megalopi. But they never. I don't think there was any science fiction stories that predicted, ubiquitous personal level computing. So, like I was talking about earlier, small data is going to be just as important as big data if we're going to be resilient as a species. I think every watershed should have a lo-fi water towering. There's a way to capture water out of the atmosphere with these kind of cool looking towers that kind of capture the fog and collect it. And this is how we could not only solve the water stress problem, but the data stress problem, because a tower means you now have connectivity at ham radio type bandwidths. You don't have to send high speed videos everywhere. I mean, if you can get like a telegram system, of pretty good chunks of data going around the world from developed to non-developed nation, I think this would be a real stride for humanity to do as a goal. And we could do this by 2030, I'm pretty sure. And these could also have community facilities like ovens, and when people could go there to get water and to cook their food and to use as a public restroom, maybe a little overnight hostel stay kind of thing. These are human rights. We supposedly all believe in these human rights: freedom of movement, access to free expression, pure water, pure air, good food, good shelter. If we can't provide a baseline of all these things around the world using all these great tools we have, really, what are we doing? Just watching Netflix and waiting for the apocalypse? I don't know. I think we could do better, and I know we will. So thanks, Sharif.
Excellent. Mr. Tom.
Well, yeah, in conclusion, first of all, going back to the idea of I would rather slip a page of Chinese characters under the door to an AI or an AGI than I would a human being at this point. And that's to say when it achieves a certain qualia that we have, an artificial general intelligence. But I do think that the trend lines are going there. There will be some AIs that get rid of bias. There are some that will. Sorry. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
People watching, Mr. Tom.
Yeah. Anyway, so in conclusion, sorry, a call came in on the thing. I think that what we're experiencing right now is we are all the divide and conquer rule is still at play. Only now it's automated and has an algorithm. And so while we booted up in the American Revolution, we had to reboot the republic with the civil rights, civil war. Then we defragged our democracy with civil rights. This is different because everything is automated and it's keeping us in corrals. So anyway, the idea of me putting a AI out there as a separate entity, as a robot running mate, is a little manipulative, because what it really is by putting that separation out there, I am causing people to want to do more of the collective AI. This is happening anyway. We're not going to stop this. We're going to have every form of AI we can imagine. We need to get involved at a very serious public level to mediate this thing and help it work for us, and actually create algorithms that attack these bias-hungry worms we have out there. Anyway, there's a lot to be said about this topic, and I look forward to it. And thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you. This is actually excellent discussion. Even when I'm doing these sessions, the media, the different schools, university, they are just sharing their information. We are watching. This is really exciting topic, and we are really happy with that. I'm really happy, and I'm really feeling proud of our speakers, our mentors, our board of advisors, our people, those who contributing for World Talent Economy Forum. Now, Malaysian government climate change divisions, they believe that World Talent Economy Forum is the best platform, and they can do all of the open dialogue. So even they are moving with this public-private partnership. Malaysia open up this $60 billion project planning for climate change, and they are inviting World Talent Economy Forums. Not only that, even Indian governments, Japan government, Italian government, they believe that we have right kind of peoples, those who can solve many problems, and especially the climate change related things and different cutting edge related technology. Everybody actually like World Talent Economy Forum contributions, and I really love the contributions of our speakers and the audience, those who really supporting World Talent Economy Forum. And beside that, I believe that this kind of revolutionary idea actually very important. I'm from developing nations. I know how technology help to like overcome from different kind of obstacle. I always say that when I saw first mobile telephone come to example Bangladesh, that time I saw how it changed the local community. When different kind of technology get into this country, how economy growing, and the like local people actually import through the technologies. So I'm a big fan of modern science, modern engineering, and modern technology, and how actually Mr. Tom actually introducing different kind of idea, and all of our speakers actually analyze it and support it. This is actually the talent economy. This is actually transhumanist concept, and we believe if we do our regular brainstorming in that way, maybe in the futures we can solve many problems, and we never know. Maybe after 1 and 2 terms, maybe we can find like president from USA like Mr. Tom Rose and AI, and they will lead their nations, and this is the way the developing nations will learn, and they will solve their problem. Thank you, Professor David Smith, Mr. Adam, Professor Donald, Mr. Dan, Dr. William, and Mr. Tom for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Trust me, the developing nations, they are waiting. Many big corporations like our like this Dubai Expo actually supporting by Petronas. It's a Fortune Global 500 companies and one of the largest company. This is actually Malaysian economical main sources. So I'm really happy. I'm excited, and I want to see more revolutions. I want to see more excitements and more innovations. And this is the way our new generation will get the new way. Thank you, Mr. Tom, for your great idea. Professor David Smith, Professor Donalds, Mr. Adam, Dan, and Dr. William for your support for World Talent Economy Forum. And more excitement, more opportunities, and more open dialogue will come, and we will solve many problems. Bye-bye and take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Great show.